Have you ever just stopped and wondered if the universe owes you an explanation for why it is the way it is? Today, we're diving into a really short but honestly super profound text. It points out this fascinating paradox in how we demand answers, both from science and from faith. It's all about what we expect when we ask that one simple question: why? So, this is the big question right at the heart of the source material. It's a question that kind of forces you to step back and think about how we approach the biggest mysteries out there, you know? It doesn't matter if you're looking through a telescope or reading a sacred text. So, let's see how the author starts to break this all down.
All right, so the author kicks things off by putting two very different questions side by side. On the surface, they look like they're from completely different worlds, but this whole comparison is set up to expose what the author sees as a major inconsistency, a real intellectual double standard in how we go about looking for answers. Okay, so check this out. On one side, you have the theological question: why on earth would a creator make a universe that's young but is designed to look ancient? Then, on the other side, you've got a classic scientific question: why is a fundamental constant, like the speed of light, that specific value and not a different one? The author's entire point is that how we handle these two questions tells us everything about what we expect from an explanation.
So let's dig into the first side of this comparison. This one is all about a common challenge that gets thrown at religious believers, focusing on divine creation and the apparent age of everything around us.
Now, it's really important to note that the author uses their own specific term here: old Earth extremists. This is the source's language, okay? And it's used to describe people who point to physical evidence, things like rock layers or the light from distant stars, to argue against the idea of a young Earth. So here's the question, just as it's written in the text. You see the assumption that's baked right in there? The idea is that a creator's actions have to make perfect sense to us, to our logic. It implies that we, as the observers, are somehow entitled to an explanation that fits neatly into our own understanding of how things should work. Okay, let's switch gears and jump over to the other side of the author's parallel. We're moving from a debate about theology to a really fundamental question in physics. And this, right here, is where the main argument starts to crystallize. And again, the source text gives us another specific label for the people on this side of the argument: secularist extremists. This is the author's term for folks who, when asked deep why questions about the universe's basic properties, have a very specific kind of comeback. Just look at that response. What a stark contrast, right? In the scientific context, the answer isn't really an explanation at all. It's more like a shutdown of the question itself. The universe just is. It's treated as a brute fact, something that doesn't owe us any sort of logical or intuitive explanation. And here it is. This is the moment the author brings these two ways of thinking into a head-on collision. By contrasting that demand for a divine explanation with the idea that the universe owes us nothing, the text builds up to its main and I think pretty powerful challenge. This is the pivot point. This is the question that connects the two sides. If we're willing to accept that the universe doesn't have to make sense to us, well, what does that mean for everything else we question? This table just lays it out so perfectly. It shows the author's big logical move. They take that brute fact response we often just accept from science, and they apply it straight to the theological question. The thinking is, if the universe has no obligation to make sense, why do we automatically assume its creator does? So here's the core argument laid bare. The author is saying it's a huge intellectual double standard to just accept the universe as some unexplained brute fact, but at the same time demand that a creator's actions have to be totally transparent to our, let's be honest, limited human logic. The author is basically asking, hey, shouldn't the same standard apply here? This whole line of reasoning leads the author to a final, really profound takeaway. And it's not about what we can't know, but about why we're able to know anything in the first place. So, from this point of view, the very fact that we can understand anything, that patterns exist, that science is even possible, that logic actually works, that's not something we're entitled to. It's not an obligation being fulfilled. Instead, the author completely reframes our ability to understand things as a gift, calling it an act of kindness. So let's just quickly walk through the argument again. It starts by pointing out this apparent double standard in how we ask why. Then, it questions the whole idea that anything has an obligation to make sense to us. From there, it takes the logic we use for scientific laws and applies it to theological ideas. And it all lands on this really powerful final thought, that our ability to understand the world isn't our right, it's a gift. And so, we're left with this. It's a really thought-provoking question to chew on. If we actually adopted this perspective, that understanding isn't something we're owed, but something we're given, how would that completely change the way we approach science, faith, and the very questions we decide to ask? It's a pretty deep thought to carry with you.